Good afternoon and welcome to EUROMED Migration Talks, a series dedicated to discussing migration in the Euro-Mediterranean region. This initiative is run by the EU-funded EUROMED Migration IV project implemented by ICMPD. I'm your host, Marco Ricorda. Today I have the pleasure to talk to EASO Executive Director, Nina Gregori. Thank you for taking the time to meet us today.
Pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
So it is a crucial time for migration and asylum policy in Europe, and certainly the European Asylum Support Office, better known as EASO, plays a key role in implementing this policy. EASO supports the needs of EU member states' asylum systems. Now, in your experience, what are the main challenges you face in terms of communication? What is your target audience and how do you keep them engaged on such sensitive issues?
Yes, indeed, Marco. I think that, of course, asylum and migration have always been quite challenging policy areas in Europe, but also broader, and also very challenging area of communication, of course. I think that here we see that there are the sensitive social issues and sensitive political topics that we always discuss within the migration framework. And I think that this is something that, of course, you could not describe as a black or white matter. I think that, of course, it's quite complex, the area, let's say, legally, technically, but also politically. So I think it's very, very difficult that you can say that this is like, let's say, an easy task for the communicator to even see the narrative, to describe it correctly, to describe it only from one angle. And I think that the really main challenge now is that, of course, I think that everybody has a role to play in this puzzle of not only policy, but also of communicating the policies and issues when it comes to migration and asylum. I think that from perspective of the EASO, of course, we are not a political entity. We are an executive agency. We try to support the member states in their endeavors to improve asylum systems. And in this respect, of course, we try to use, let's say, a certain jargon, certain also description of the processes, and we try to be, in a way, in our communication, honest. We don't want to, in a way, take sides. We don't want to, as I said, picture the situation in black and white. We only want to, in a way, communicate the facts, because, of course, also part of our mandate is to gather the facts from the area of migration, and especially, of course, from the area of asylum. So to tell you let's say, to give a short example, for example, you know that, of course, in Europe, when people are coming and applying for the asylum, of course, the, let's say, big majority of those who are applying are, in fact, not really the one who, at the end of the day, will get an asylum in Europe. So that's 2/3 of people who are not, in fact, entitled to get an asylum. But how do we communicate that to those who are coming? How do we communicate that to our societies? And what is, let's say, the legal then way of those who are, coming to Europe, but they're not eligible for asylum? I think this is something that probably we'll need to reinforce still in the future, because a proper communication would broader than let's say the possibilities of, or not broader, narrow, the possibilities of a different interpretation. And I think with that, the communication would definitely improve, if, of course, that would be our narrative.
All right, so now let's talk about asylum seekers and their challenges. Asylum seekers are confronted not only with the criteria for acquiring the status of refugee that you just mentioned, but also with public narratives about them. In a nutshell, can you tell us what is the state of play of narratives on asylum in Europe today?
Yes, it's true that, of course, asylum seekers, when they come to Europe, they go through, let's say, certain legal procedures. I think this is something that, in the sense of the communication, this has been a lot of time neglected. It's not that, of course, asylum seekers should meet certain criteria in the procedure, but basically they, in a way, are the one who are, let's say, facing with a special procedure where in which they in a way have to justify that they have been, of course, prosecuted back home, so that they have a justified reason when coming to Europe, that of course the Europe will in a way protect them, that we will give them a safe home and of course a safe space to live in. So I think that's one point that in a way as is a bit aside when we talk about the refugees, the people coming to Europe, people coming illegally to Europe, because of course when we talk about the arrivals to Europe through the external borders of Europe, this is a mixed migration flow. So that means that of course there are certain statuses of people that in fact needs to be then upon the arrival established. So I think that this is first point where we could bring some more clarity in the process. And I think that would also benefit to those who are in fact the real, let's say, refugees, the real people who are coming to Europe, you know, to be protected. And I think that also would in a way help us fight the, of course, smugglers, the organized crime, when they are persuading people to come to Europe, although as asylum seekers, of course, although we know that legally they have really very little hope to succeed in asylum procedures, because they are coming from example, the safe countries of origin. So there are many things that we could, in a way, say, communicate clearly as Europe, and of course we would then with that also, in a way, persuade, you know, those who are going to this dangerous route to take other possibilities, to take the legal, of course, pathways to come to Europe. And of course, also this would need to be something that would need to be communicated differently, I believe. And I'm glad that in the new Pact on Migration and Asylum that was presented last week, the communication, so the Commission did in a way point out this, I would say, quite clearly in the points of the presentation. And I do hope that, of course, this will in a way be the future of communication in Europe.
I agree, that was a very positive step. Now, a question that we have asked all our interviewees over the past few months is about the impact of narratives into policymaking. So do you actually think that migration and asylum narratives impact policymaking? Do you think there is a correlation between the way migration and asylum are debated and the creation of related policies? What can you tell us about this?
Yes, I think that this one is a really challenging question. I think it's a bit of a catch-22 situation, I think, because in fact, I think they are mutually in a way reinforcing those two, so that you mentioned, so the migration as narratives and the policy-making narrative, because at the end of the day, it's not such a straightforward situation, because you've seen that not only in the level of EU, but also in the national member states, of course, this, let's say, the narrative of the debate of the policy itself, it's, let's say, ever turning. So, of course, it's difficult to create, let's say, policy which is then broadly accepted, but on the other hand, you can't really show the impact of this policy straight ahead or immediately, or with, let's say, with the direct impact on people. So I think that what is important here, from my perspective, is that, of course, the messages or the images that we can communicate or send to the people, that those would have to be, I would say, concrete in the sense of our action. So if we could communicate more directly of what Europe really does in the field of migration, what are our endeavors, how far have we come in this quite short period of time since, let's say, 1999, when we started to build common European asylum system, and if we would show really direct impact that it has to people who are arriving to Europe, but also to the member states that need to face these challenges, I think that this communication would be then, let's say, more clear, but also more successful, and it would lead to less, let's say, public disputes or discourses of the essence of the policy, which is this something that functions or doesn't function, or should we think about something really new, or how could we then, in a way, come to the policy making circle again? So I guess that's more of the concrete, let's say, acknowledgement or concrete example of the functionality of the policy would make that also this, let's say, discourse, which is quite political, less effective, and would not lead to extremes such as, let's say, right-wing extremes when this debate is, let's say, surreal, or it goes beyond some of the normal boundaries.
Well, then let's stick again to communication, because very often the European Union is, let's say, not accused, but they point a finger at the fact that they use a language which is not accessible to the larger public. But of course, these are assumptions. But building on your experience, do public officials, but also the larger public, fail to differentiate between the terms migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees? So how important is terminology when it comes to such a multifaceted phenomenon? Because very often it seems that the term migrant is abused, overused, misused. What is your experience in communicating the work of EASO and the EU asylum policy in this case?
Yes, I think that that's quite important point indeed. Why? Simply because of, let's say, pure legal consequence of that. Because you know that, of course, different statuses, from different statuses, different legal statuses, let's say, different rights also are deriving. So if you talk about generic definition as a migrant, right, that doesn't mean nothing. When you go or dwell deep in the national legislation, you see that the migrant does not exist in legal definition or in the term. When you talk about the, let's say, national, of course, legislation of all of the member states. So, of course, you have the definition of asylum seeker, you have the definition of a refugee, you have the definition of a beneficiary of international protection, you have the definition, of course, also of irregular migrant, but only a migrant as a term, of course, in the legal sense, it doesn't mean anything, no? Because, of course, as I said, it's so very important that if we talk about, of course, different situations, yes, indeed, of course, with the irregular migration or migration as such, you have the mixed flows, but then people inside are definitely, at the end of the day, they will have a certain status when they will be when they will be facing different procedures in the member states. That's why I think that's very, very important. But of course, and we are, as an agency, we try to communicate correctly. Of course, we always, when we talk about the asylum seekers, for sure, we will not talk about migrants. When we talk about the beneficiaries of international protection, we will not talk about refugees, because there are two, at least from deriving from acquis. There are two, of course, definitions. One is person with subsidiary protection. So it sounds very legal, no? It doesn't sound, how can I say, attractive or sexy in the public domain. It doesn't, but it means a lot, very much, when it comes, to the really concrete discussion on the consequences of different legal statuses. And I think that if also here communication would be more, let's say, precise or more clear, then of course we would also give a correct messages to the broader public or the audience, or even, of course, to migrants, and of course also to our partner countries. But I think that still, I think that the situation is improving. Now, I can't say that it's not getting better, but still, probably we have all together, we have a lot of work still to do on this front.
I absolutely agree. Now, the mission of EASO is improving the quality, the effectiveness, the harmonization of the common European asylum system. Can you tell us how countries have reacted to different changing migratory patterns? Can you see, some countries are adapt easier, some countries are more resistant to change? What has been your experience, and what are your findings in relation to this?
Yes, indeed, as you said, Marco, our mission is to support the member states in the implementation of common European asylum system. That means that, of course, we support them also in the implementation of their national system. I think that here what we need to say is that this complexity of European asylum system, it's huge because we have 27 different member states, and then they have to, in certain period of time, implement or transpose the European acquis into their national legislation, with all, of course, the differences in the national legislation as it is and as it exists now. And I think that from our perspective, of course, we definitely work together with all 27 member states administrations. So we have excellent cooperation on the technical level. So we do, for example, trainings for EU asylum officials. We have trained more than 35,000 people in last years. We're trying to, of course, also promote our guidelines in the use of, in the strengthening of the asylum procedures, and we are trying to, in a way, bring them closer together, also through the debates in our very extensive, of course, networks that are built for the purpose of exchanging good practices, and of course also the use of our tools. And that's, as I said, on a technical level, this is definitely something that really functions well. EASO is now 10 years old, and I think that this, already has been the time where we have really come to a certain level of great collaboration. But then there is another level, and that's, of course, I would say, political level. And in this respect, as you said, and that is the ever-changing world, because, of course, you know that migration and asylum in the member states is, let's say, on the daily agenda of interesting debates and also, let's say, political disputes inside of the member states. And of course, here on this level, on the political level, it looks like this is ever-changing world. It looks like that, of course, there are many, let's say, important actors in member states who want to influence the, let's say, political situation in the member states, but also on the EU level, and even, of course, maybe broader. So, of course, in this respect, this is different world, I would say. So it's interesting from our perspective to see that, of course, as I said, on a technical level, the common European asylum system really functions. But on the political level, sometimes it looks like we're only merely at the beginning, or we haven't even, discussed it properly yet. So I think that's why it's going to be very interesting also, let's say, the new debates on the pact or the new legislative proposals that are put on the table from the Commission. Because here, again, we will see this effect of policy or the political debate or communication and down to the technical level when the negotiations in the Council and the Parliament will start.
Now, we like to conclude our interviews usually with a piece of advice from the interviewee. And my last question for you today is, building on your experience, what would you suggest to foster evidence-based policymaking and rebalance the migration narrative in Europe?
This is something which, in fact, we've discussed a bit in the previous question, one of the previous questions. For sure, I think that evidence-based communication, I think this is something that we are lacking in the fields of migration and asylum. This is something that we as an agency want to promote. There are many good practices. I will give you a short example. We work in 4 first-line, so-called first-line member states. We have concrete operations on the ground there. We are working in Greece, in Italy, in Cyprus, and in Malta. And you know that, of course, there we are working hand in hand, supporting the national authorities on the field of asylum. And for example, now with COVID outbreak, of course, all 4 member states, together with our help and support, they've adjusted to do, let's say, remote part of the procedure. So remote interviewing, remote, registration somewhere. So I think that this is something that it was difficult to achieve. They needed to adjust fast. We needed to adjust fast, but we did that. So we did strive to, let's say, start and continue the asylum procedures on the ground as soon as possible. So, but when you were listening or seeing the let's say, broader communication on the situation on the asylum and COVID impact, you would read that, of course, so the member states stopped the procedure, everything was in a way, well, let's say, abandoned, and they did not recover even yet. What in fact is not the truth. It's not the truth at all. We were there. We were, as I said, we were faced with the challenge, and we did, you know, in a way, of course, struggle and restart the procedures in all 4 member states where we were present. And I know that this happened also in other member states. So I think that this kind of a, let's say, positive communication sometimes on migration and on the experience and on the concrete action that is really taking place on the ground, I think that would help a lot to see this, let's say, the policy of migration and in particular asylum in more of a positive light.
Nina Gregori, thank you very much for being with us today. It was a real pleasure to discuss with you the functioning, the challenges, and the development of EASO and the future of the common European asylum system. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marco, for the invitation. Thanks. It was a pleasure to talk to you.